This lesson is on inequalities that involve absolute value. Excuse me, and specifically solving inequalities that have an absolute value in them. Now, if you haven't learned how to solve compound inequalities, you should look at that first, because absolute value inequalities are related to compound inequalities. So there's a link in the upper right-hand corner. You can go watch my lesson on that. So quick review of compound inequalities. Remember that compound inequalities either come out as an and or an or. So the top here is an example of an and. It's saying that x is greater than -2 and x is less than 5. So x is any value in between here. And remember that an and inequality can be written as, put the x in the middle here, and greater than -2 and less than 5. So and inequalities can be written like that. Ors cannot. Now the other example is an or inequality. And so or inequalities always graph like this. X is less than this number or greater than this number. So basically it's saying x can't be anything in between here. So it's the opposite of an and. All right, so again, I'm showing you this because absolute value inequalities are going to come out as either an and or an or. So let's move on to the absolute value. All right, so this says the absolute value of A is less than B. Now what's important here is to, I'm very sorry. What's important here is to remember that absolute value means a number's distance from 0 on a number line. So I'm going to write a statement here because it will help you to understand what's going on. So what this says is that A is less than B away from 0. A is less than B away from 0 on the number line. So if we have 0 on this number line, right here, A is less than B away. So to be less than B away, it would have to be in this area right here. Because if it's over here, then it's more than B away from 0. So if you have absolute value less than something, that's always going to graph as an and. And what you're going to do is break that apart and say that A is greater than -B, whatever this value is, or sorry, not or, and A is less than +B. So if it's an absolute value less than, it's always going to be an and. The opposite of that is a greater than, and this is going to be an or. So again, if you think about what this is saying, it's saying A is more than B away from 0. Is more than B away from 0 on the number line. So it's the exact opposite of the one above. So here's 0 on the number line, and A is more than B away. So it could be on either side. Now, note if there's a line underneath this, and or equal to, then you're going to use solid circles. All right, so same thing, but you would have a solid circle. So let's look at an example. Okay, so this says the absolute value of 8n is greater than or equal to 20. So I like to think with the number line. All right. So I've got 0, I've got +24, I've got -24. These would be solid circles. So this is saying that 8n is more than 24 away from 0. If it's more than 24 away, that means it's this way. So this is going to graph as an or. So what we have two equations that were not equations, but inequalities we're going to have is 8n is greater than or equal to 24, or 8n is less than or equal to negative 24. And I'm getting this, excuse me, I'm getting this directly from the graph. So I graphed it first. So I read what this meant. This says the absolute value of 8n is, so 8n is more than, greater than 24 away from 0. So that gave me this graph. And then from this graph, I wrote these inequalities. So 8n is greater than 24, that's this way. 8n is less than or equal to negative 24, that's that way. All right, and now we're going to solve. So I divide both sides by 8. So n is greater than or equal to 20, sorry, not 23, 24 divided by 8 is 3. Or n is, let me show my work here, n is less than or equal to negative 3. And so the graph of this solution, if you were asked to graph it, would be, here's 0, here's 3, here's negative 3. It would be solid circles. N is less than or equal to negative 3, that's to the left. Greater than or equal to positive 3, that's to the right. And that would be your graph. All right, so let's look at one where it's less than. So this is saying the absolute value of 8n is less than 24. So it's saying it's less than 24 away from 0. So the graph of that one would look like, here's 0, here's 24, here's negative 24. These would be open circles. So it's less than 24 away from 0. That means it's in here. So this is going to be an and. All right. So I'm going to look at this graph to write my inequality. So my inequalities are 8n is greater than negative 24. That's taking care of this one. And 8n is less than positive 24. And then we're going to solve these. Divide by 8. So n is greater than negative 3. And divide by 8 over here. N is less than positive 3. So if I was asked to graph these, the solution, so I put 0 in the middle, 3, negative 3, these open circles. N is greater than negative 3, less than positive 3, so that shades this way. All right, so let's look at one more example. All right, so this one we need to do a little work. We need to get the absolute value piece by itself. All right. Now, I'm just going to warn you ahead of time. Remember, there's a rule when you're solving inequalities that if the variable is being multiplied or divided by a negative number, then you have to flip the inequality. Okay? So, let's get rid of this 4. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. So now I have negative 3 times the absolute value of m plus 2 is greater than negative 18. Forgot the 1. Now look, right here, this negative 3 is being multiplied times the m and times the 2. So the variable is being multiplied by a negative number. So I have to flip the inequality. So because of this negative, I'm going to have to flip the inequality. So I'm going to rewrite this as negative 3 times the absolute value of m plus 2 is less than negative 18. And now continue on. So I'm going to divide by negative 3. And so absolute value of m plus 2 is less than positive 6. All right. So now this says it says m plus 2 is less than 6 away from 0. So if it's less than 6 away from 0, that means this is going to be an and. So again, I'm just drawing this so you can picture what I'm saying. I'm saying that m plus 2 is less than 6 away from 0. That means that it's in here because this is all less than 6, and this is going to be an and. So break this up. So m plus 2 is greater than negative 6. That's this piece. And m plus 2 is less than positive 6. And so now we're going to solve these. So minus 2, m is greater than negative 8. And subtract 2, m plus 2. Sorry, my mind is wandering. So those cancel out. M is less than 4. So remember, you can rewrite this as m greater than negative 8. You can only do this with an and less than 4. So if you were to graph this, put 0, put 4, negative 8. These are open circles, and you would shade in between. All right. So let's look at the same thing, but here it's a less than. So I'm going to do this exact way. Subtract 4 from both sides. Minus 4. So I have negative 3 times the absolute value of m plus 2 is less than or equal to negative 18. Again, the variable's being multiplied by a negative number. So I have to flip the inequality. So that becomes negative 3 times the absolute value of m plus 2 greater than or equal to negative 18. Divide both sides by negative 3. So the absolute value of m plus 2 is greater than or equal to 6. So what that's saying is that m plus 2 is more than 6 away from 0. So again, I'm just drawing this so you can visualize what I'm saying. These would be circles. M plus 2 is more than 6 away from 0. So that would be like this. That's more than 6. And this would be an or. So let's write that. So I have m plus 2 is less than or equal to negative 6. That's this piece. Or m plus 2 is greater than or equal to 6. Subtract 2 from both sides. So m is less than or equal to negative 8. Or subtract 2. M is greater than or equal to 4. So if I graph these, 0, 4, negative 8, solid circles, and they're shaded like this. All right, so I hope that was helpful to you. If you didn't catch something, go back and watch it again. So a lot of times my students are confused by this topic. So if you watch it again, hopefully it'll help you to better understand it. So please give it a like and a subscribe. And if you got any comments, please leave them. Until next time.